At my nephew's birthday, my sister told my son he wasn't invited. "Why can't I stay?" he whispered. I didn't beg. I picked him up. What happened next shocked the entire town. I can still see Ethan's eyes dart between me and his aunt, confusion giving way to embarrassment. The air around us felt cold despite the summer heat. My sister's voice was calm, deliberate, the kind of tone people use when they want to make sure everyone hears. I didn't ask for an explanation, but I carried that moment with me like a live coal in my chest. Started like any other family gathering. Claire and I had made sure Ethan was dressed nicely. Blue button-up, hair combed, a wrapped gift under his arm that he'd picked out himself. He'd been talking about seeing his cousins all week, rehearsing in the back seat how he'd say, "Happy birthday, Josh," without sounding shy. I'd been telling myself this was going to be a peaceful afternoon, that maybe Lauren would put aside whatever petty grievance she was nursing this time. We walked up the front steps of her house, the noise of laughter and clinking glasses spilling out from the living room. I opened the door and stepped in, and there she was, Lauren, standing in the hallway, all polished smiles for the other guests until she saw us. Her expression didn't drop, exactly, but there was a shift, a tightening around her eyes. She glanced down at Ethan, then back up at me. "He's not invited," she said, voice low but pitched just enough for the people nearest to catch it. "It's not that kind of party." Ethan froze, his small hand gripping mine tightly. His face went from open and expectant to confused, then pinched, like he was trying to figure out if it was a joke. "Why can't I stay?" he whispered. It wasn't just random cruelty. Lauren had a way of deciding who fit into her curated world, and apparently my son didn't. I didn't look at her again. I bent down, lifted him into my arms, and said, "Come on, buddy." The gift he'd been holding slipped a little under my arm, but I didn't bother handing it off. We stepped back out into the sun, the laughter inside sounding suddenly distant. On the way to the car, Claire murmured something like, "Mike, maybe we should," but I shook my head. I didn't trust myself to speak without turning around and causing a scene. The walk to the car felt longer than it should have. I strapped Ethan into his booster seat, forcing a smile for him even though my chest was tight. As we pulled away, I caught a glimpse of Lauren through the window, already chatting with another guest as if nothing had happened. Ethan sat quietly in the back, looking out the window. I tried to think of something light to say, anything to take the sting out of the moment, but every time I opened my mouth, I saw that flicker of confusion in his eyes again. Claire reached over, resting her hand on my arm. She's always been like this," she said softly. "Let's not let her ruin today." But that was the thing, this wasn't new. It was just the clearest, ugliest version of it. Lauren had been the golden child for as long as I could remember. Charm, ambition, the perfect marriage to Tom, a councilman who knew how to work a room. And she played the part well. The perfect hostess, the community fundraiser, the smiling face in the local paper. But behind closed doors, there was always that undercurrent. Little barbs disguised as jokes, forgetting to tell us about family plans until the last minute, implying Ethan was too shy, too quiet, not as spirited as her kids. I'd let it slide for years. I told myself it was better to keep the peace, to let her have her wins. After all, what was I going to do? Start a cold war over playground-level slights? But that afternoon, driving home with Ethan staring silently out the window, something shifted. I thought about the way she'd looked at him, not even like he'd done something wrong, just like he didn't belong. I didn't know it yet, but that moment was going to rip the mask right off of everything I thought I knew about her, and about what my family was willing to do to protect their own image. And once that happened, there was no going back. The next day, I still couldn't shake the image of Ethan's face at the doorstep. I'd gone through work like a ghost, barely hearing half of what my coworkers said. By the time evening rolled around, I needed to get it out, to unload on someone who wasn't Claire because she was already carrying enough of it. So I sat down at my desk, phone in hand, and messaged Paul, an old friend from high school I still chatted with now and then. I didn't censor myself. My fingers flew over the keys, the words spilling faster than I could really think about them. I wrote about Lauren's arrogance, how she'd been using her husband's position as a kind of social shield, how she'd humiliated my son in front of people like it was a sport. I even said, half in anger, half in bitter truth, that she'd always acted like the rest of us were just props in her perfect little political play. When I hit send, I felt lighter. Not better, exactly, but lighter. Paul sent back a short wow and a laughing emoji, which I chose to read as support rather than dismissal. I didn't know, not then, that Paul sometimes did small media favors for Tom's campaign. By mid-afternoon the next day, the ground under me had already shifted. Claire's phone buzzed with a message from a friend. "Hey, just so you know, your brother-in-law's staff are talking about you guys." Attached were screenshots of my own words from the message to Paul, except they'd been cropped to look like I'd gone on an unprovoked rant. The tone was all venom, stripped of any context about what had happened to Ethan. Within hours, more friends sent me the same thing. "Mike, this is going around. You might want to know." Some messages were from people I hadn't talked to in years, people who probably didn't care about the truth, just the spectacle. That night, after dinner, Claire and I sat at the kitchen table, going over what we'd seen. My hands were tight around my mug, knuckles white. "They're framing you," Claire said. "Like you're just jealous she's—" She stopped, catching herself, but the word hung there anyway. Ethan padded in from the living room, holding his toy truck. "Dad?" he asked quietly. "Does Aunt Lauren not like us?" My throat tightened. "No, buddy," I said. "She just makes bad choices sometimes." He looked at me for a second longer, like he didn't believe me, then wandered back toward the TV. The weight of that small exchange hit harder than the gossip. It wasn't just about me anymore. This was creeping into his world, changing the way he saw family. By 8 that evening, my phone rang. It was Mark, a colleague from work, who'd always been blunt in a way I appreciated. "Look," he said, "I don't know what happened with your sister, but people are saying you're unhinged, that you've been obsessed with tearing her down because you're jealous." I almost laughed at the absurdity of it, but it didn't feel funny. It felt like someone was drawing a map, marking me as a problem to be dealt with. I told him I appreciated the heads up and hung up, my pulse still pounding. I looked over at Claire. "If this is how they start, what's next?" She didn't answer, but I could see the same question in her eyes. We both knew the answer was nothing good. 2 days later, my phone buzzed with a message from a name I didn't recognize. The profile photo looked like a press badge clipped to a jacket. The first line was simple, "I think I can help." The second line had my sister's name and Tom's, side by side, and a sentence that made my stomach drop. "I've been sitting on evidence for months." I stared at the screen long enough for the message preview to fade. Claire was rinsing dishes at the sink, the late sun cutting through the kitchen window. Ethan was on the floor with his cars, murmuring to himself, peaceful in a way that felt too fragile to touch. I stepped into the hallway and opened the message. Her name was Rachel. She said she was an investigative journalist covering local government, and that my blow-up in the group chats had pushed my name into the right rooms. She'd been looking for someone inside the family who wouldn't crumble or bargain when things got loud. "You seem like you won't," she wrote. "And from what I saw at that party, you have a reason that isn't political." I typed and erased 3 different replies. In the end, I asked for proof she wasn't fishing. She sent a short voice memo so I could hear she was a real person and not another burner account. Then a second message came through. A single redacted PDF labeled with the city's seal and the words Community Impact Grant. I opened it. The application listed a program I'd never heard of, a youth mentorship initiative with a vague mission statement and padded numbers. At the bottom were 2 signatures. The first was Tom's, as an approving councilman. The second was Lauren's, as the sponsoring partner for her Women's Leadership Foundation. I scrolled to the address listed for the program. It was a storefront I knew. Vacant for months, papered windows, a faded for lease sign hanging crooked. I went back to the kitchen. Claire dried her hands and turned toward me, reading my face like a weather report. "What is it?" "Someone messaged me," I said. "A journalist. She has a grant file with Lauren's signature on something that doesn't exist." Claire's mouth tightened, not in surprise, but in that bracing way people do when the thing they feared shifts from possibility to fact. "Do you trust her?" "I don't know yet," I said, but the document looked real. "Ethan's here," she said gently. "Whatever you do, make sure we don't accidentally set our lives on fire with him in the room." I nodded and typed back to Rachel. I asked where she got the file. She said she couldn't burn the source, but she could show me enough to make a decision. "Meet me," she wrote. "Public place. Your call." I chose a cafe on the far side of town, the kind of place where nobody knew me by name. On the drive over, my brain kept clicking through consequences the way a bad mechanic clicks through symptoms. Noise here, grinding there, no clean fix in sight. If I said yes to this, there would be no gentle way out. If I said no, the people who humiliated my kid would keep smiling in front of cameras and carving up the city behind them. Rachel was already there, sitting near the back with her bag on the floor and a notebook open. She looked tired in the way of people who spend a lot of time watching doors. When I introduced myself, she didn't launch into a pitch. She asked about Ethan instead. How old? Does he like school? It disarmed me more than any speech would have. I opened the folder. Inside were printouts and photos. The first few pages were emails between Tom and a consultant about optimizing allocations, so that approved funds could move without direct votes. Phrases like pilot initiative and emergency discretion were sprinkled like confetti. The next pages were bank summaries, showing transfers from a city account into a nonprofit that had been created 4 months earlier and dissolved 2 months after that. The nonprofit's mailing address matched the vacant storefront. Where does Lauren come in? I asked, keeping my voice level. Rachel tapped a stapled set of pages. Here, the sponsor. She gives her foundation's name, nice branding, and signs that the program exists and is delivering services. She also signs off on impact reports that are cut and paste repeats with different dates. I flipped to a photo of Lauren at a ribbon cutting. The banner behind her had the program's name in bold letters. I'd never been invited to that event. I hadn't even known it happened. There was no crowd in the shot. Just a tight crop of smiling faces and 2 kids who looked like they'd been pulled from a nearby playground and handed scissors for the photo. How solid is this? I asked. If I go forward, will it stand? Rachel didn't rush the answer. The documents hold. The transfers hold. What we'll need is context, people to confirm that the storefront never opened, that the program never existed. I have 3 sources ready to go on background and 1 who will go on the record if someone else goes first. And that someone is me, I said. You make this more than a bureaucratic story, she said. You make it unavoidable. You're the one they can't easily dismiss as a political rival. If you're willing to put your name to what you saw and what you've learned, it's the difference between a story that fades and one that triggers an inquiry. I leaned back, the chair creaking. Through the window, traffic slid by in slow loops. I thought of Ethan in the back seat of our car, staring out at Lauren's house like he was solving a puzzle he could feel but not name. I thought of how fast the group chats turned me into an unhinged joke. How quickly the town would forgive a photo of a ribbon cutting and forget to ask what was behind the papered glass. What happens to my family if I do this? I asked. Not my parents, not Lauren. My family. Claire and Ethan. It will be loud, she said. And people who like being close to power will try to make it your fault. But if this stays buried, the next person they cut out won't be a relative. It'll be someone without a voice. I closed the folder. My hands had that slight tremor I get when adrenaline is close but not yet useful. Can I think about it overnight? Of course, she said. Take the copies. I'll text you a secure upload link if you decide to share anything you have. At home, Claire listened while I talked through everything. We sat on the edge of our bed like we were balancing on a curb. I told her about the storefront, the signatures, the transfers. She didn't ask whether I was sure. She asked what we would tell Ethan when people started talking at school. We tell him the truth in pieces he can carry, I said. That sometimes grown-ups break rules and pretend they didn't. And that standing up to it is scary but important. Do you believe the town will care? She asked. I don't know, I said, but I care. And I can't stand the idea that the person who told him he didn't belong is stealing from the same families who think she's looking out for them. I didn't sleep much. Around 2 in the morning, I got up and walked through the dark house, careful not to creak the floorboards outside Ethan's room. I stood in the kitchen with the fridge light pooling at my feet and pictured every path forward, every fight that would follow. Then I pictured Ethan's face at the door again, and the choice sorted itself. In the morning, I messaged Rachel. I told her I'd meet again and bring anything I had that could corroborate timelines. Texts, photos, the invite from the party that was for family only, and somehow didn't include my kid. I told her I'd put my name on a statement if she could secure the other sources. Her reply was immediate. I'll set it up. Today. I put the folder on the counter and made Ethan breakfast. He asked for extra syrup and told me his car needed a new tire because the old one doesn't like the kitchen floor. I fixed the tire. We ate. The morning light reached across the table like a promise I didn't fully trust yet. Before I left to meet Rachel again, I knelt to Ethan's level. "Be good for Mom," I said. "I'm always good," he said, dead serious. "I know," I said. "That's why this matters." I grabbed my keys. Claire squeezed my hand at the door. No speech, no last-minute question. Just pressure and release, the simple language of trust. I drove to meet Rachel with the copies on the passenger seat. The weight of them light as paper and heavy as a decision you can't unmake. Rachel sat in the back corner, her coat folded beside her. A legal pad open and a pen tucked along the spiral. She didn't look up right away. She finished a line, capped the pen, then met my eyes like we'd agreed to be honest or we wouldn't be anything at all. "You brought what you mentioned?" she asked. I set a manila envelope between us. The party invite. A few texts around that day. Some photos that help with timing. I paused. "I also brought questions." "Good," she said, and slid a thicker folder to my side. "Because I brought answers." I opened it and felt the small, involuntary hitch that comes when your brain recognizes something it didn't expect to see. The first sheet was a clean printout of an email chain. Subject lines nested, dates marching down the page. Tom wrote to a consultant about consolidating community support through streamlined grant mechanisms. The consultant replied with language that sounded like it had been tested in a focus group. Pilot program, rapid impact, discretionary release. Rachel tapped the top corner. "We pulled these off a city server through a records request. Redactions were light because they didn't think anyone would zoom this far in." I flipped to the next page. A spreadsheet, colors alternating row by row. Transfers from a city account to a nonprofit with a name so generic it could have been invented by a board intern. That nonprofit, in turn, sent money to 2 shell companies. I traced the lines with my finger like they might rearrange into something less obvious if I looked away. "The shell companies?" I asked. "One's tied to a mailbox service downtown," Rachel said. "The other is a holding company Tom used once before, buried under 3 layers of post office boxes and a cousin's name. It all lands with him eventually. Clean on paper, dirty in the bones." I turned another page. Photos. Tom at a ribbon cutting I didn't remember seeing in the paper. Lauren stood beside him, a bright smile, hand on a child's shoulder. The banner behind them celebrated a program with a friendly acronym that didn't match any real address, any real staff. The storefront in the background was the vacant one I'd driven past more times than I could count. In one photo, the reflection in the window caught the photographer. No press badge, just a phone, an angle you get when you're there alone. Rachel slid a second packet from the folder. "This is where your sister steps from orbit into gravity." I read the header, Community Impact Grant Application. It had the city seal, a scan of a signature block. Lauren's name was printed beneath neat, rounded letters that were undeniably hers. She'd signed as a sponsoring partner through her foundation. The narrative paragraphs were copied and pasted, a template stretched like thin dough. 2 impact reports followed, dated a month apart, both using identical sentences with the noun swapped. Mentors for tutors, teens for families, hours for sessions. "Did anyone see a single mentor?" I asked. "Not one," Rachel said. "We canvassed the block twice, talked to the landlord, checked utility records. That address never turned on the lights. Even the mailbox was empty." I let the papers rest and stared past the window to the ghost of our reflections layered over the parking lot. I pictured Ethan's face at the birthday door, the way he'd searched my expression to gauge whether he should feel ashamed. It landed in my chest like a weight I couldn't put down. Rachel didn't push. She waited. The waitress drifted by in a practiced orbit, refilled our cups, left a slice of pie we hadn't ordered with a soft, "On the house, honey." I thought about the ways small kindnesses and quiet cruelties add up over time, the way both can change a life. "How tight is this?" I asked finally. "If I put my name to it, how much of it survives a hard shove?" "Emails and bank records survive," she said. "The nonprofit filing dates survive. The shell companies survive. The signatures survive. What they'll try to kill is credibility, and that's why you matter. They'll call me biased. They'll call other sources political. But if you're willing to say what you saw, what you received, What you verified with your own eyes, you become the thing they can't shrug off. I ran my thumb along the edge of a page until the paper warmed. They'll come for me, I said. They already have. They will, Rachel said. And they'll try to make it about a family fight instead of a public theft. But the money trail doesn't care about family. It just cares about where it landed. Silence sat with us for a few breaths. Somewhere behind the counter, a dishwasher clanked, then hummed into a new cycle. The neon sign buzzed, faded, buzzed again. I turned to a string of texts Rachel had included, Lauren coordinating volunteers for a photo op, asking a staffer to make sure we have 2 kids in the shot. The words were casual, but something in them felt cold. Not illegal, maybe, just indifferent to the people who would see the photo and believe a service existed because a child held scissors in front of a papered window. My mind drifted to a week earlier, to a small playground where Ethan had stood at the top of a slide, sneakers braced against the metal. His friend had asked if we were going to Aunt Lauren's house later. Ethan had looked down at his shoes and said, matter of fact, "We're not allowed at Aunt Lauren's." He didn't cry when he said it. He just stated it like the weather. That line had been looping in my head ever since, a child's summary of a set of adult choices. I closed my eyes and let the memory pass through me, then opened them to the folder again. "If I do this," I said softly, "we don't ease into it. We jump." Rachel nodded. "We jump with a parachute. I'll never ask you to do something reckless, but I will ask you to be brave." I smiled without humor. Brave is just what people call you when they're not the ones who have to go to work the next day and read comments under their name. "That's true," she said, "and I don't have a way to make that part gentle. What I can do is control the timing, the scope, the corroboration. I can make sure we publish documents, not adjectives. And I can make sure you're quoted in your own words, not the ones they'll try to stuff in your mouth." I flipped to the last section, call logs that put Tom in the same 30-minute window as a set of transfers, his number bouncing between the consultant and a deputy in the finance office. The pattern drew a neat triangle on the page. It didn't need my sister's smile to brand it. "What about my parents?" I asked, surprising myself with the question. "They'll say I'm trying to tear the family apart. They'll say I'm jealous, or that I've always had it out for her. They'll say what protects them," Rachel said. "And then they'll have to say it while people are staring at signed documents and empty buildings." I took a breath that felt like the first full one I'd had since the party. "If I agree, what happens next?" "Next, I record your statement," she said. "We get copies of your invite and the texts into our evidence stack. We have 2 sources who will confirm the storefront never opened. We contacted the city for comment so they can't claim surprise. Then we publish with everything in black and white. The ethics board will have to open a file. They won't be able to pretend they didn't see it. And if I say no?" Rachel didn't break eye contact. "Then I keep digging. I'll run the story when it meets my bar without you. But it will be easier to dismiss, and they'll recover faster. Sometimes the difference between a story and a reckoning is one person who refuses to look away." I let the words sit. I thought of Ethan again. His careful questions at bedtime, the way he watches my face when he's unsure how big a problem is. I pictured him older, asking me what I did when I knew. I pictured telling him I stayed quiet because it would be easier, because I didn't want more trouble. The thought felt like acid. I reached for the pen tucked in Rachel's notebook and slid it to myself. "Record me," I said. "I'll give you a statement." She clicked a small recorder on the table, placed it between us like a third cup. "State your name." "Michael Carter," I said. "I was present at my sister Lauren's home on the day of my nephew's birthday. I witnessed her tell my son he wasn't invited, and I removed him without incident. In the days that followed, I received messages and documents that led me to meet with you. I've reviewed emails, bank records, and signed grant applications bearing my sister's name tied to programs that do not exist. The storefront listed has never opened. I can confirm the timeline of events that placed these signatures alongside specific transfers." Rachel nodded for me to continue if I wanted. I did. "I'm not doing this because of a fight at a party," I said. "I'm doing this because I won't teach my kid to look away when someone uses their power to take what doesn't belong to them." Then smiles for a photograph. Rachel clicked off the recorder. She didn't smile or clap or offer congratulations. She just reached for the folder, squared the pages, and said, I'll send you the draft to approve your quotes. We'll go live when the city sends a comment or the deadline hits, whichever comes first. I signed the consent form she slid over. The waitress reappeared and asked if we wanted the pie boxed. We said yes. It felt like the right kind of small grace to carry into a night that was about to get heavier. Outside, the air had a bite. I stood beside my car with the box of pie cooling my palms and watched Rachel drive off with her trunk full of paper and the shape of my voice on a tiny recorder. The diner's neons softened the edges of the lot. Across the street, a row of dark windows reflected the occasional passing headlights like fragments of a river. Before I got in, I pulled out my phone and texted Claire. It's happening. I gave the statement. I'm bringing home pie. Her reply came back fast. We're ready. Ethan asked if he could stay up a little late. I said yes. On the drive home, I felt the usual dread scratching at the door. Comments, calls, the sudden chill of people who used to nod at me in the produce aisle. But under it, something steadier moved into place. Not relief. Not yet. Just the quiet certainty that the line I'd drawn inside myself had finally been matched by one I put in the world. At the kitchen table, I'd set down the folder earlier, like it might burn through the wood. Now it would leave the house entirely. In the morning, there would be a draft in my inbox and a clock ticking on a city office that liked to pretend its lights never went out. I drove with the windows up, listening to the road hum under the tires, thinking about the difference between being loud and being clear. I didn't plan a speech for my parents. I didn't rehearse a comeback for Lauren. I just pictured Ethan's small hand in mine at a doorway, the way he had leaned into me when I picked him up. By the time I pulled into our driveway, I knew exactly what I would say when he asked why I was late. I had to tell the truth, I'd say, so people would stop pretending. Over the next week, Rachel cross-checked the documents with public records and reached out to her contacts at City Hall. Every fact came back solid, but she warned me the story would need airtight verification before going to print. The following Monday morning, I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing on the nightstand. At first, I thought it was the alarm. Then I saw the notifications, messages, missed calls, news alerts stacked one after another. The local paper's headline was the first thing I read. Bold across the screen. Councilman's office under ethics probe. Whistleblower alleges misuse of city funds. Below it was Rachel's byline, and halfway down the article, my name in black and white. They hadn't buried me in the middle paragraphs either. My statement was front and center, what I'd witnessed, what I'd reviewed, what I'd handed over. Every word I'd spoken at the diner was now public record. Claire read it over my shoulder, her hand resting lightly on my arm. It's out, she said quietly, almost like she didn't want the walls to hear. By the time I made coffee, my phone rang again. The caller ID was Lauren. I hesitated, let it go to voicemail, then thought better of it and picked up. Her voice was sharp, brittle in a way I'd only heard a handful of times before. Do you have any idea what you've done? She demanded. I told the truth, I said. You've destroyed my family, she shot back. Do you think Tom's career will survive this? Do you think our kids won't hear about it every time they walk into school? You told my son he wasn't welcome in your house, I said evenly. That was your choice. This, I tapped the folded paper on the counter, is about your choices in office. There was a long, loaded silence. You've always been jealous, she finally said, her voice low now. You've been waiting for a chance to drag me down. I almost laughed. Lauren, if I wanted to drag you down, I wouldn't have needed proof. But I have it. And so does everyone else now. She hung up without another word. That afternoon, Tom stood at a podium in front of City Hall, cameras flashing. I watched the live stream from my laptop. He wore a navy suit, the tie I'd seen in family photos. His jaw was set, his smile tight. This is nothing more than a politically motivated attack from a bitter relative, he said. And we will fight it with every legal tool at our disposal. The word bitter hung in the air like smoke. By the next day, the divide in my family was official. My parents called to say they were deeply disappointed in me. My father's voice carried that clipped, restrained tone that always meant he'd already decided who was right. You've embarrassed this family, Michael. You should have come to us first. And then what? I asked. You'd have handled it quietly? Swept it under the rug? It's not about rugs, my father said. It's about loyalty. You don't turn on your own. I hung up before I said something I couldn't take back. My brother's text came next. You've crossed a line. Don't contact me until you fix this. I didn't reply. The backlash bled into places I didn't expect. At Ethan's school, he stopped running to greet me at pickup. One day, I asked his teacher if something had happened. She hesitated before saying, "He's been a little quieter than usual. Some of the kids overheard parents talking about family stuff. It might be getting to him." That night at dinner, Ethan pushed peas around his plate without eating. "Why are people saying mean things about you?" he asked finally. I glanced at Claire, then back at him. Sometimes, when you tell the truth about something bad, the people who like things the way they were get upset. It doesn't mean you did anything wrong. His eyes searched mine for a long moment, like he was weighing whether I believed what I just said. Then he nodded, but the smile he gave me didn't quite reach his eyes. Everywhere I went that week, I felt the shift. People holding my gaze a second too long, others looking away entirely. Old acquaintances I hadn't spoken to in years sent me private messages, half of them supportive, half of them telling me I should be ashamed. Rachel warned me it would be like this. She also reminded me that the city ethics board had no choice now but to open a formal investigation. But in the quiet moments, in the space between my son's questions, my sister's accusations, and my parents' disappointment, there was something else. A calm that came from knowing the story wasn't mine alone anymore. It was out there, moving on its own, and no amount of spin from Lauren or Tom could make it disappear. The truth was public now, and nothing about my family would ever be the same. 6 months later, the dust had mostly settled, at least in public. The ethics board's final report was blunt and unforgiving. Tom had redirected city funds into personal accounts, and Lauren had knowingly signed off on fraudulent grant allocations. The conclusion left no room for interpretation. 2 days after the report dropped, both of them resigned from their positions. Tom from his council seat, Lauren from her role on multiple community boards. The announcement was covered live, but without the fanfare of a press conference this time. No podium, no flags, just a few short statements read in a monotone, followed by cameras catching them leaving through a side door. If I felt any satisfaction, it was muted. This wasn't a clean victory, it was a dismantling, and dismantling always leaves wreckage. My parents still hadn't spoken to me. The last contact I had from my father was a short email months ago, telling me I had humiliated this family, and that my actions would forever change how we see you. My mother didn't write at all, but I'd heard through my brother that she still insisted Lauren had been set up. It was as if the evidence didn't matter, blood loyalty trumped proof. At home, Claire and I kept things steady for Ethan. We went to his soccer games, showed up for school events, and kept our focus on the small moments. There were days I caught him looking at me with that same searching expression from before, as if checking whether I still believed in the things I told him. I made sure to answer that look every time, with a smile, a nod, or a quiet hand on his shoulder. One evening, while I was taking out the trash, my neighbor, Mrs. Carver, waved me over. She's lived across the street for 20 years, the kind of person who notices everything but rarely comments. That night, she did. "I just wanted to say," she said softly, glancing toward her own front door, "what you did, it mattered. Most people wouldn't have risked it. But you did the right thing." I thanked her, but her words sat with me long after I went back inside. It wasn't just about Lauren and Tom anymore. It wasn't even just about clearing my name. It was about Ethan. About making sure he knew that you stand up when someone treats you, or anyone you care about, like they're disposable. That birthday party had been the spark, but the fire had burned far beyond it. And while the fallout had cost me more than I'd expected, family ties, old friendships, the illusion of peace, it had given me something solid to hold on to. I could look my son in the eye and know I'd shown him that truth matters, even when it's messy. Especially when it's messy. I hope you enjoyed the story. What would you have done if exposing your sister also meant your family might turn against you? Do you think Michael should have kept quiet for the sake of peace? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you want more stories like this, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one.